Kezia Dugdale is Scottish Labour's deputy leader. She joins me now from Edinburgh. Well, Kezia Dugdale, the SNP are arguing in this election for increases in public spending over the lifetime of the next Parliament. They say you could do that and help balance the current budget. But their basic point is that there's no need for any further public spending cuts. Why are they wrong?
Well, if I can address that in a second, but first of all take an opportunity, Gordon, this morning to pay tribute to Tom McCabe, who has of course passed away. He was a really significant figure in the Labour movement, and he deserves to be remembered this morning. He went from the shop floor of a factory in Cambuslang as a shop steward to stewarding the nation's finances. And I just think it's only right that we take a moment to pay our best wishes to his family at this terrible time.
We should say that. Tom McCabe, who was a minister, actually, I think in several administrations, wasn't he, in Scottish administration?
He was, yeah. He was the first finance minister in Donald Dewar's government, so a very significant part of the Labour movement's history, and that's why I think it's very important that we mark his memory and his passing today. But you asked me a very specific question about the deficit and about public spending. If you remember on the debate on Thursday night, Nicola Sturgeon also said that the deficit needs to be paid down. She didn't say how that would happen, but we are very clear. Ed Balls, Jim Murphy have both said, and it's on page 24 of our manifesto, that there needs to be spending cuts. Now, there are two reasons and two ways of how you go about doing that. You can take the Tory way, and you can cut millionaires' taxes and make sure that millions of people pay the price of that with more public services, or you can do the Labour way. And we've set out how we would pay down the deficit. We've talked about a small reduction.
But why not do the SNP way and not have any public spending cuts at all?
Look, the SNP stand for huge public spending cuts. It's called full fiscal autonomy.
Well, OK, that's a different issue. We can discuss that later.
It's not. It really isn't, Gordon, because £7.6 billion worth of
they are saying, and the Institute for Fiscal Studies agrees with them,
already face.
They are saying, and the IFS appears to agree with them, that you could increase by a small amount real public spending in the UK over the term of the next Parliament, and still balance the budget. So why are they wrong?
Well, I would point to what the Institute of Fiscal Studies say about full fiscal autonomy as well.
Well, that's a different issue.
Skewered Stuart Hosey on that issue this morning. The SNP need to set out very clearly in their manifesto tomorrow just exactly what full fiscal autonomy means. We know, because the Institute of Fiscal Studies tell us, that that represents £7.6 billion in this year alone. It will rise to over £40.5 billion by the time that we get to 2020. Now, that seems like a big figure, Gordon. Let me put it in real terms. That's £18 in every pension. It's £15 to every family that gets working tax credits.
Right, OK. You want to ask them questions about full fiscal autonomy, but you haven't answered the question I asked you about the UK budget. Why does Labour not do what the SNP does and say we can have small public spending? Look, what is underlying this, and what is making the appeal of Nicola Sturgeon, not just here in Scotland, but to some extent in England as well, is a lot of people feel we don't need any more public spending cuts. There's no need for it. The IFS says you could balance the budget without having any more, so why is Labour insisting on cutting public spending more?
Look, the difference between Labour and the SNP right now is that we've set out in our manifesto just exactly what our platform is for the next 5 years. So let me tell you about it. It is a plan for working families across Scotland. It's focused on raising living standards. That's why we're calling for an £8 national minimum wage.
These are bromides in reply to a specific question. Why do you want to cut public spending when, according to the IFS, you don't need to?
Actually, the proposals in our manifesto allow for an additional £800 million worth of public spending from new taxes which apply across the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, that's a progressive platform. You heard Stuart Hosey talk about progressive policies this morning, yet he couldn't name a single one. So let me tell you a little bit about how we would get that to £800 million
just before you do this,
just
before you do this, as you want to avoid talking about it, let me just quote from your manifesto, page 17, outside of the protected areas of health, education and international development, there will be cuts in spending. And Angela Eagle, on Andrew Neil's programme only about 20 minutes ago, said we will have to make very tough decisions on spending on areas that are not protected. Now, what I'm asking you is why there is no need, according to the SNP and according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, for these tough decisions to be made. If Labour says they will eliminate the current budget in the lifetime of the next Parliament, according to the IFS, you don't need to make any cuts. So why are you insisting on making cuts in departmental spending?
Look, I'm sorry, Gordon, but I don't accept that the SNP have any economic credibility whatsoever. Their policy on full fiscal autonomy has changed 3 times in the last 3 weeks. And actually, I think you got 3 different answers from Stuart Hosey in the last 20 minutes. So I'm not going to take any lectures from the SNP about fiscal responsibility. But you're right, Labour does have a plan. It's set out very clearly in the manifesto, and it's a plan for working people. We will help raise living standards across this country. Scotland cannot afford another 5 years of the Tories, and we're going to spend every waking minute of the next 3.5 weeks campaigning for a Labour majority government so we can deliver on this plan for working people across the country. An £8 minimum wage, an end to zero-hour contracts, investment in education, schools and our hospitals, making the most of this additional £800 million of public spending that you won't get from the SNP because they only want Scottish taxes to pay for Scottish public services. They want an end to the Barnett formula. That's what full fiscal autonomy is and stands for. Now, the question for Stuart Hosey and the SNP is, will that be in their manifesto tomorrow? Because if the words full fiscal autonomy appear anywhere in the pages of that manifesto, they will have to spell out very clearly what it means for the nation's public finances and where the cuts will fall.
Well, I'll give you a last chance to answer this. Would you like to tell us in which department spending will be cut, according to the sentence I just read from your manifesto?
I actually tried to address that in your first question to me, and you cut me off. We've actually said how we were going to do that. So 5% of the nation's richest pensioners will lose their winter fuel allowance. Now, that's a tough decision, but it's a fair one. And it's in stark
sorry, that's in the
contrast
welfare bill. That's got nothing to do with departmental spending.
To what the Tories are offering to do, which
sorry,
is to
that's got nothing to do with departmental
spending. It has everything to do with the nation's finances and the priorities that we're going to take.
But, you know, we can talk about everything at once. Your manifesto says you will make cuts in unprotected areas in departmental spending. I'm asking you which areas. Well, and you talk about welfare. That's not the same as departmental spending. You know that.
Well, I do know that, but I'd also think that people who are watching your programme today want to understand where the SNP cuts will fall, and it will be in the pockets of working families across the whole of the country because of this £7.6 billion of cuts that they want to enforce on the Scottish people.
All right. When Jim Murphy was here last week, he said that Labour was in favour of maintaining the benefits cap. Your manifesto says you will maintain the household benefit cap, but you will examine whether it should be lower in some areas. Where should it be lower? Which areas of the country should the benefit cap be lower?
Well, that's part of the manifesto which appears in both the UK manifesto and the Scottish manifesto, because that part is reserved to Westminster.
But you could decide to lower the benefits cap in Scotland, could you?
Well, I'm not sure that that's what the Labour Party manifesto says. It might be what you want it to say, Gordon, but that's not the reality of it. The manifesto
I don't
also,
want
of course,
anything. I'm simply asking you a question. Could that apply to Scotland?
Has a platform for more powers for the Scottish Parliament, and we'd like the last word over benefits to be made in the Scottish Parliament. I'd like to see just exactly how the SNP lay out their plans to maintain the security system in their manifesto tomorrow. It'll be very interesting to see how they're going to lay that out. Right.
Now, but if you're in favour of regional benefit caps, the SNP are in favour of a regional policy on the retirement age. They say it's unfair that the retirement age should be raised in Scotland because people don't live as long here. So if it's all right to have a regional benefit cap, will you at least look at regional variations or perhaps income variations in retirement age?
I remember Shona Robeson getting into terrible trouble over this because of what actually lies at the heart of the SNP's policy on this. But look, the problem with the policy around the retirement age is actually the cost to the public purse. Now, it costs a huge amount of money to do what the SNP are proposing, and they haven't said how they're going to do it. So I take you back to the point I've made several times this morning, Gordon, and I'm afraid I'm going to say it again because it's true. The SNP have no credibility when it comes to economic matters because they cannot spell out how they're going to pay for the things in their manifesto, and beyond that, they actually stand for austerity max. They want to cut public services even further than anything that they're suggesting that the Labour Party stands for.
On the TV debate, the BBC debate the other night, Nicola Sturgeon said to Ed Miliband, and I'm quoting, "Whatever differences you may have with me, there is nothing to the differences we have with the Tories." Do you agree with that?
I was pretty astonished when she said it, actually, and I was astonished again to hear her on Andrew Marr, because She talks about the benefits of being a minority government in the time that she had as the Deputy First Minister. What she failed to tell Ed Miliband on the debate that night and Andrew Marr this morning is that during the time she was in charge of a minority government, she had to pass a budget each and every year, and she did that with the Tories' support each and every year. So she pretends to be some great force against the Tories, but relied on Tory votes to pass budgets all the way from 2007 to 2011. Now, Nicola Sturgeon gets up in the morning and fights for independence. Labour politicians get up in the morning and fight to end poverty and inequality. That's our driving force, and that's what makes us different.
Right, but the bottom line here is you will do a deal with the SNP should they be powerful at Westminster, and should Labour emerge as the largest party, or perhaps not even the largest party. I mean, it's all very well being very vehement about the SNP, but everybody knows you'll do a deal with them.
No, we are campaigning for a Labour majority.
We understand that, but should there not be a Labour majority, you'll do a deal with the SNP.
It's very easy for journalists to run off from the idea from a Labour majority very quickly, because you like processology, you like to talk about what's going to happen the day after the election rather than the big issues of the election.
Sorry,
I wish we could talk more about living standards and the issues that matter to the people of Scotland.
10 or 12
now, if we keep talking about living standards, I think we can still get a Labour majority, and that's what I'm going to go and do when we leave the studio after today. But to answer your question directly, if the SNP want to bring down the Labour government by voting against the Queen's speech, then the consequence of that is a Tory government, and that's what they will do if that's the way that they vote against the Labour Queen's speech. It's as simple as that.
Just to be clear, because I'm not sure there's actually much difference between what you're saying and what Stuart Hosey was telling us earlier. You're basically saying that should you have a Labour government that relied on the SNP for support, rather than having any formal deal with them, you'd basically say to them, here's what we're going to do, and you can either vote for it or not. That's what you're saying.
The SNP will have the opportunity to vote for a Labour Queen's speech. If they don't do it, the consequence will be a Tory government. Now, however you voted in the referendum, however you're feeling and voting in a few weeks' time, I was out in Edinburgh South yesterday, and the vast majority of people that I met wanted to see the end of the Tories. They cannot afford another 5 years of a Tory government. Ed Miliband was a very clear alternative to David Cameron at the debate on Thursday night, and has been for some time now. You can see that in his approval ratings. If you want a Labour government, if you want a Labour Prime Minister focused on raising living standards in this country, I'm afraid there's only one way to guarantee of getting that, and that is to vote Labour. But there's something else quite revealing in your programme this morning, and that was Stuart Hosey dodging and diving over the question of when the next independence referendum would be. And can I say to you, Gordon, this morning, I've had a look, and every single SNP manifesto since 1999, whether it be for the UK Parliament or for the Scottish Parliament, had a commitment to a referendum in it. Now, I'd like to know whether or not that's going to appear in the SNP's manifesto tomorrow. We're going to keep our promise on a vow for more powers to the Scottish Parliament.
I think Stuart Hosey answered that question. He said it wouldn't appear in their manifesto tomorrow.
No, he didn't say that. I listened very carefully.
Well, hang on, let's not talk about that, because we only have to wait till tomorrow to see. But I think I think he pretty much did say that.
It's very important, Gordon, that we know when the SNP are going to have their next referendum, because they made a promise to the people of Scotland that there would not be another referendum for a generation. Now, we're going to keep our promise on the vow. Will the SNP keep their promise on another referendum? It's been in every manifesto before now. The Constitution is a reserved matter. I would be absolutely astonished if the detail of that is not in their manifesto tomorrow. There's a big credibility test for the SNP tomorrow when it comes to their plans for another referendum and their plans for full fiscal autonomy.
Okay. Now, Jim Murphy, when he was in this programme, it's a few months ago now, shortly after he became leader, said that his aim in this election was that every Labour seat would remain a Labour seat after the general election. I presume, even with the most heroic optimism, you don't expect that to happen now, do you?
We're still going to continue to fight for it.
Well, I know you're going to fight for it, but you don't expect it. You can't realistically expect that to happen.
Well, I can tell you, and I travel the country a lot at the moment, speaking to Labour Party activists, going out and knocking on doors, that they still believe that that can happen. That's because that's what they want to happen. It's what they get out of their bed, fired up to do every day, because every great change that has been delivered in this country, from the National Health Service to the Scottish Parliament to the national minimum wage, has been delivered by a Labour government that people went out and campaigned for and worked for. So yes, we've got the belief that we can still do this, because every Labour Party activist in the country wants to change this country and wants to change it for the better, because we want to increase living standards.
Do you have any evidence?
We're not prepared to give up on that.
Do you have any evidence you can share with us from your campaigning that the polls are all wrong?
Well, yes, because I'm out all the time talking to people on the streets about how they want to change their country. They are sick and tired of the Tories, and they understand that the only way to get them out is to get a Labour government in. Now, that is our job as Labour activists, as Labour politicians over the next few weeks.
Right, okay.
Is to campaign for that and laying out our platform.
That's, just briefly, that's not appearing in the polls. I mean, another thing Jim Murphy has said is he expected a swing to Labour to come very, very late in this campaign.
He did, yeah.
Is that still, do you still hope, stroke expect that to happen?
Well, yes, and he did say very, very late. And one thing I would say to you, if you look back, most general election campaigns are only 3.5 weeks. So actually, the election campaign only starts tomorrow. Now, I'm sorry that will go down very badly in houses across the country who are sick and tired of having leaflets and direct mails through their doors. They would probably wish the election was tomorrow so they could get it over and done with. But it really is only just starting. And we have huge plans for the next few weeks. We're going to go out and campaign for every single vote because we want to change this country and change it for the better. It's not just about getting the Tories out, although that is our driving force. It's about a more hopeful future for the country, a country that works for working people, and that's our number one priority.
Look, I'm sorry, Kezia Dugdale, we are going to have to leave it there because the programme has come to an end.